Well, the Texans gave the Bengals a scare. They trade ahead of them at pick 48. They go with Ursary, the offensive tackle, instead of what many thought would be the Bengals' target of Tate Ratledge. It is not Tate Ratledge. Instead, at pick number 49 in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Cincinnati Bengals have selected Demetrius Knight Jr., linebacker out of South Carolina. Not a name that many people had on their list here on day number 2 for the Bengals, but Jacob, linebacker is a position that we talked about earlier this week as maybe a quiet need for the Bengals and maybe a position that we weren't talking enough about. They go out here in round number 2 now and add to that linebacking core in Demetrius Knight Jr.
Linebacker in this draft class was a very unique position, like a lot of them were in this class when you got down to it. Jihad Campbell, the consensus number 1, and then after that, kind of a mix depending on who you talk to. Demetrius Knight Jr. from South Carolina, certainly in that mix, in that discussion. PFF had him as their number 2 linebacker in this draft class. Jalen Walker listed as both a linebacker and an edge rusher. Certainly think Atlanta's going to use him as an edge rusher, making Demetrius Knight the second linebacker on PFF's board. But that wasn't the case for everyone. Our friends at Gridiron Grading, who came on earlier this week, had Demetrius Knight as a target for the Bengals, but as Craig said, not here in day 2, more as of a day 3 target. And even Ari Mirov, as he broke the news of the draft pick, said a little early after the news of Demetrius Knight. So a slight reach for the Bengals, but a player they must like a lot and a position of need. So if you're comfortable with him at 25 years old, one of the oldest prospects in this draft class, if you're comfortable with him going in, starting week 1 next to Logan Wilson at linebacker, being able to use Oren Burks, which none of us ever believed was going to be a starting linebacker on this defense, maybe that is the right pick. It's certainly a win-now move if he's going to be ready to go in week 1. Mike Petriglia tweets that Al Golden said he can play Logan Wilson off the ball and Demetrius Knight on or off the ball, combined with whatever Stewart can do on the edge. He thinks he just added 2 very versatile players that can play multiple spots on the defense at a high level. Certainly something that the Bengals seem to be targeting early in this draft.
Absolutely. Demetrius Knight, extremely experienced. He's going to be 25 this year. So certainly a more experienced player. Spent 4 years, Jacob, at Georgia Tech, played in a total of 36 games at Georgia Tech before transferring to Charlotte. He spent 2023 at Charlotte as a linebacker there in the American Conference before spending 2024 at South Carolina. And as we were talking about before having a chance to actually hit record tonight, had probably his most productive year out of his 6 years there at South Carolina in the SEC.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's something that with a player with 1 year of production, obviously that does raise a red flag. But when you get here into the second round, having your best year of production, not at Georgia Tech in the ACC, not at Charlotte in the American, where he did thrive as a junior, but at South Carolina as a senior playing off-ball linebacker, that really means something in the SEC. This is a conference that had a third of the first round out of the SEC this year, and he was a player that you heard about all throughout the season as one of the more dominant players off the ball in that conference. So to get a player like that, hopefully an immediate impact. Something we talked about being worried about last night is that Shamar Stewart isn't going to be his best right now. And we're all worried about winning a Super Bowl right now with Joe Burrow. Well, Demetrius Knight, I think we can all agree, is probably going to be, if not his best, pretty close to it right now at 25 years old after 6 years of significant college experience. And I think that's something that taking a swing in the first round, getting more of a sure thing, a known commodity in the linebacking room, I think that's a really good thing for the Bengals to have.
Absolutely. We talked at length last night about RAS scores and comparing players to their projected outcome in the NFL. Demetrius Knight, of course, an interesting testing and profile here. We'll give you a look at first at his standalone RAS scores from the Combine. Scored an 8.21 RAS score with a 9.07 40-yard dash, 8.63 on the 20-yard split, and 8.35 on the 10-yard split. Vertical did lack only 31.5 inches. He stands at 6 foot 1.5 inches tall at 235 pounds. And Jacob, when you compare this to potential comparables and current NFL players, who does he line up with?
Well, funny enough, he lines up with a guy that we all know pretty well here in Cincinnati, and a guy who he might be replacing. He lines up very, very well with Jermaine Pratt, pretty much across the board, both collegiate production and athletic testing. Pratt and Demetrius Knight Jr. seem like very, very similar players. And we all know that earlier this offseason, Jermaine Pratt requested a trade from the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, now here we're sitting on Friday, April 25th, and that still hasn't been resolved. Maybe that was just resolved in the second round, taking Demetrius Knight, signing Oren Burks in free agency. It feels like there certainly is an odd man out in that linebacking room, and one of them already requested to leave Cincinnati. So if you're looking to replace Jermaine Pratt, you found a pretty good Jermaine Pratt replacement. Now, if a lot of Bengals fans after last season might have been saying, thank goodness Jermaine Pratt's gone, we're going to be able to raise, that level in the room a little bit. Maybe not what you're getting here with Demetrius Knight, but we have to remember last year it might have been rough. Jermaine Pratt was a very well-liked player in this fan base, especially on the Super Bowl run before the AFC Championship loss on the way to the locker room when that kind of all went to crap. But before that, he was very well-liked, a player who meant a lot to this defense and seemed to be a crucial part. So if Demetrius Knight can be that pretty close to off the rip, I think that's a pretty dang good pick at 49.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's the thing, though, Jacob, and we talk about the pick at 49, and that's really what this conversation has to ultimately turn to as we talk about scoring this selection of Demetrius Knight Jr. in comparison to the options, right? And this is not meant to be a knock against Demetrius Knight Jr. at all. Everything we see, the film that we've seen against him, the tape that we see, all of the coverage that we've seen is certainly a positive. But as you take a look at the players that are still on the board and available at this point in the draft when the Bengals selected Demetrius Knight Jr., while linebacker was certainly a position that many thought was an option and a position of need, many thought it wasn't the top need, right? You talk about offensive guard, you talk about potentially in the secondary, either at cornerback or in safety. There were lots of players available at all of those positions that the Bengals could have taken here, and instead they go with Demetrius Knight Jr.
And I think the one that most Bengals fans will be looking at is someone that a lot of people had at the top of their personal boards at pick 17, Mike Green, still sitting there as we watch more picks roll in as we record this right after the Bengals made their selection. That leads me to believe that not only were the Bengals not high on Mike Green wasn't on the Bengals board. And I know right before the draft, Todd McShay reported that the Bengals were not concerned with character concerns. They had all those players on their board. Passing on a player like that twice who led the FBS in sacks last year, that leads me to believe that he wasn't on your board at all. That's fine. If they made that decision in their process of evaluating his character concerns, that's a completely fine decision to make. I think that's incredibly important that they make a decision like that with character concerns. When evaluating all of these players leading up to the draft, it was always, if you can clear whatever that is, then make the selection. Obviously, that wasn't the case with Mike Green. They pass on him twice. We'll see how far that fall happens, because at some point, the talent is going to surpass the risk of whatever those concerns are, because we all know he's talented. Outside of Mike Green, a player that has been mocked to the Bengals consistently since the beginning of this draft season, believe it or not, a peek behind the curtain, the name we had in here as the placeholder, trying to manifest it a little bit, Tate Ratledge, the offensive guard from Georgia, still on the board as the picks tick by. We're now live up towards the 24th pick in the second round. Tate Ratledge still on the board. The only reason I'm not completely upset about the Bengals passing on Tate Ratledge, who would have been the perfect pick at 49. It's exactly what we're talking about Demetrius Knight slotting into the defense right away, playing elite football. He would have done that on the offensive line at guard. It would have been a no-brainer. He's also one of the older prospects in this draft, probably close to his peak. It makes a lot of sense for the Bengals. However, Craig, what have we seen over the last really 2 or 3 weeks, including mock drafts that consistently had Ratledge going to the Bengals? It wasn't necessarily at 49 anymore. When we got into April, it switched to 81. And that was always a shock to me. I thought he was certainly worthy of pick 49. I would have been very, very happy about making that pick here first thing tonight. But if Tate Ratledge continues to fall, like we've seen a lot of players that were consensus much, much higher on the board do so far in this draft specifically, maybe he's there at 81, and this works great as you add a player at linebacker who, with Carson Schlesinger going a little earlier than a lot of people suggested at the top of the second round, maybe those depth pieces wouldn't have gotten to where we projected a Demetrius Knight to be available, and maybe a Tate Ratledge, because of that age concern, will. So We'll reserve judgment as we watch the rest of this draft hold off. We've talked a lot about how offensive line is one of the deeper positions, especially when you incorporate those tackles switching to guard. The Bengals absolutely have to add one. At this point, I would imagine it is at pick 81. We'll certainly see later tonight. But speaking in this pick in a vacuum with the board and everything that we are privy to knowledge-wise, I think it's an all right pick if it's a player you really like and can make an immediate impact.
Well, I think that's the biggest thing. We knew that there were two areas of focus, right? The first that we talked about was the offensive line. We know that the offensive line needs help, offensive guard specifically. The other one, hate to say it, was defense, just generally defense. And so the Bengals, after the last several years, going out and picking offense early in the draft, despite many people on the fan base thinking that they needed to go defense. Now they are going defense. So I'm not going to sit here and talk out the other side of my mouth after hoping that they'd go defense for the last 3 years in the draft. And now all of a sudden they are, and I'm upset about it. It's just not true. Mike Green being there, Siobhan Ravel Jr. being there, Trey Amos all being there, all could have been potentially great picks. And that's not to knock the pick that happened with Demetrius Knight. The Bengals decided that Demetrius Knight was a better fit for what they need right now, and that's totally okay. The interesting piece, and you mentioned Tate Ratledge. When we talked to Gridiron Grading on Monday, we talked about this, but some of the mock drafts that had Tate Ratledge going to the Bengals had him going to the Bengals at 81. It didn't have him going to the Bengals at 49. Yeah. So there is a chance still that Tate Ratledge or another offensive lineman could still end up with the Bengals. We don't know how this will play out. Gridiron Grading had Tate Ratledge as their number 20 overall player, despite being mocked to 81. But this is the joy of the draft. Everybody has different scores. Everybody has different opinions. But Jacob, as we sit here now, pick 56 is on its way in as we record this. And you look ahead to pick number 81. Where do your eyeballs land as you try to figure out what is next for the Cincinnati Bengals?
Well, I think it's very, very hard to get off of that offensive line, right? We came into this draft, as you said, with a massive need for defense as a whole. And through the first two picks, they've added two guys, one guy with an incredibly high ceiling and the other guy that you hope can be an immediate impact player at a very, very high level. So that's something I'm very, very excited about. Now, if you look forward to the players that are still available, obviously not a completely live board for when you guys are watching this, but we do our best to try to give you a look ahead. Tate Ratledge, as we just talked about, is certainly the perfect fit. If he falls to 81, that's the dream. The two names right below him there on that board to my right, Marcus Bowe from Purdue and Wyatt Milam from West Virginia, both tackle converts sliding down to play guard, both guys that I think will transition with relative ease and have really, really good NFL careers. I would be very, very happy about taking either one of those guys at 81. Looking at some of those more true tackles that the Bengals would certainly ask to play guard, I think there's still some good options here as well. Ozzie Trapilo, the tackle from Boston College, a little bit more of a project, but someone that is a pretty exciting player. Logan Brown was a 5-star, one of the top prospects out of his class.
Ozzie just went off the board at 56 to the Bears. So,
well, there we go. Good pick in my opinion for the Bears. But Logan Brown, right below him, still on the board as of now, a 5-star out of his class in high school, something we know the Bengals really, really care about, as we've seen in the first round over the last 4 years. And he put together a great season this year at Kansas. He's a guy I know our friends over at Gridiron Grading are really high on as well. Outside of that, more of a pipe dream and not as much of a need. But I would have been fine with a lot of these guys here at 49. I'd certainly be fine with some of these safeties at 81. If Xavier Watts somehow falls, if teams are scared of Kevin Winston Jr.'s injury, Andrew Makuba was mocked more around that range anyway without needing as much of a fall. I would love any of those three guys to be the safety next to Jordan Battle in our base defense. Move Geno Stone back to that role that he played so well in Baltimore as the third safety. I think he would really thrive better there. I think that would be a great pick. Maybe more of a luxury pick that the Bengals don't have, but I really, really like this safety class, and I think those three guys are special players.
Absolutely. Well, Jacob and I will be back with another video shortly after the Bengals round 3 pick. So if you are watching this on YouTube after the Bengals second round pick, maybe later on Friday night or Saturday, Make sure you check out Chatterbox Sports. There may be more content already posted about the 2025 Cincinnati Bengals draft. Certainly check out our live stream from Thursday night when we were live for the entire first round, reacting to all the draft picks, including the Cincinnati Bengals selection in round 1 of Shamar Stewart. For Jacob Tissett, for now, this is Craig Sandlin. This has been Chatterbox Bengals. We'll be back with another video here soon. Until then, Hoo Day.
Hoo Day.